Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the episode of today. So, this episode, I'm going to go through the 10, well, I don't know about main, but 10 important cognitive biases to be aware of, or mental or psychological biases to be aware of, so you can make much better decisions. And I'm talking about decisions when you're purchasing something, whether it's big or small, decisions for your own future, about your career, about your own abilities, any kind of decision, because we by nature are fucking biased creatures. We just can't help it. We've got a very complicated and advanced, which also makes it even more complicated, psychology and brain. So, due to how we've evolved, in a way, it serves us to be biased because we lean into the things that we know more of, we lean into the things that we think are the right thing, and it helps us to kind of steer ourselves in what we think is the right decision for our lives. So, the point of being biased is there, I think, more as a protective mechanism. However, like most things, they don't always work perfectly. And I think that just the simple act of being aware of a bias is going to help you realize, like, wait, why am I agreeing with these people? Or why do I take on board so heavily what my whole family used to do when it's not what I want to do? Or why do I feel that it's so wrong for me to make this decision when it's not actually hurting anyone? Or why do I feel like I need to stay stuck in this place? Or why do I feel like I'm always purchasing that kind of thing? Or it's really interesting. So I'm going through the 10 that I found really interesting and to take on board, and you will probably resonate. Also, I want to say that there's a lot of, but not a lot, but there's a handful of biases here that not everyone will have, but they are all very common. Okay, let's fucking get into it. Hopefully by the end of this episode, you can be like, wow, I'm just opening my eyes more and I can start applying it, because the beauty of all 10 things that I'm going to mention is sometimes it just requires awareness for you to be able to be like, all right, I'm just going to be aware of the situation, aware of how I'm thinking, and that's enough to change how you think about something. Or even if you don't change how you think about it, it's enough to help you feel less guilty or feel less like you are not in control with your life. A lot of the time we fall into these biases when it comes down to being too conservative with the choices with our life, and then we become dissatisfied with our life because we've believed certain things or thought certain things. Anyway, let's fucking get straight into it. So, number one, I've spoken about this one before, so I'm going to brush over it briefly, but it is loss aversion, or how I've also referred to it as the sunk cost fallacy. All right. So, loss aversion is pretty much a psychological concept where people have a tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring equivalent gains, okay? And what I mean by equivalent is, if we're using the example of like money, people would rather avoid losing $100 than gaining $100, okay? So we are aversive towards loss. So it's this idea that the pain of losing something is felt on an emotional level more intensely than the pleasure of gaining that thing of equivalent value, okay? This is what leads people to hold on to, investments a lot longer than they should. They're really hoping to avoid realizing a loss, even though selling that thing would be a much smarter decision, okay? So they're thinking like, I don't want to lose this investment because it's, even though they know that it's worth less than what they wanted it to be worth, they would rather hold on to it, not technically lose it, even if it could mean some kind of gain for them, okay? And then, of course, it affects you in everyday decisions as well. We look at all kinds of scenarios in our life where we don't want to lose. I don't want to have said that I lost all this time. I'm going to stay in a relationship that I'm not really that happy with, but I'm in my mid-30s and I've been in this relationship for 10 years. So instead of, when you weigh it up, you think, do I stay in this relationship miserable, but then I'm losing this relationship and I'm wasting, quote unquote, I'm doing quotation marks because you never waste, but I'm wasting all these years when I could be potentially finding a really happy relationship, or potentially being really happy alone where I can live my life on my own terms, okay? The same goes for career, for jobs where you stay in a career because you got a degree in that career and you don't want to realize that loss instead of going off and chasing something that you actually want to do. So loss aversion, always be aware that when you are making a decision based on protecting something that you're trying not to lose versus going out and doing that thing. You have to just be aware that you are skewed to avoid losses. So just the awareness of that helps you be like, all right, I need to look at where my bias is right now and ask, is this valid? Is it, appropriate for me to feel this way? Okay. So if you're thinking, I want to quit my job and move overseas, but when it comes down to it, the actual quitting of the job feels way too difficult. You're like, I can't lose this. I can't. Know that you are skewed to avoid loss. And is this going to actually play out for you in the long term? Are you going to regret not doing something because you were so scared of avoiding that loss? Okay. The next one is self-serving bias. So self-serving bias is another really common psychological tendency where, and mind you, if you're someone with like crazy imposter syndrome, this is not going to be you, but a lot of people, even people who do not have high self-esteem, fall into the category of self-serving bias. So stay tuned. It's a psychological tendency where we will attribute the good things, our successes, our wins, to internal factors. So things like when you do well at something, it's due to your tenacity or due to your consistency or your intelligence or your effort or your own any kind of ability. But then you will blame external factors for your losses, like bad luck, the actions of other people, the circumstances that you were surrounded with, bad timing, things like that. So this kind of bias is in place to protect your own self-esteem, okay? It is there to protect our self-image. And the reason this happens is because we attach too much of what we do to our identity. And we think that if I failed at something and I admit that it was my fault and it was somewhat within my control, then I am a failure. Okay. Whereas someone who's really comfortable in their own skin and who's quite confident, but like not ego confident, just confident with who they are more willing to admit that it was through either lack of preparation or maybe someone was just prepared better than they were. Or, if you go for an audition, instead of being like, oh, the director just didn't like me or they're biased or they're this or they're that, you could think, no, I did my best, but I feel like the other actor was just better than me on the day. They either prepared better, they were just a better, like you're just calling it for what it is. You are acknowledging your limitations in certain areas. Another reason is, let's say you try and start a fitness regime or diet or a new plan or a new challenge and it doesn't work out. You say, well, it's just that there were too many parties and it's just that, my partner always, encourages me to do something else instead when I'm getting ready for the gym, or it just rains so much and this and that. The problem with that mentality is that even though there are going to be external factors that do get in the way, that can cause speed bumps along the way, in general, if you're consistent enough, those things don't cause you to fail. Okay. But if you're always attributing you not succeeding to external things, then what does that mean? It means that the next time you're going to go for that goal, you're probably going to approach it the exact same way because you're not taking ownership as to why it failed the last time. And this has nothing to do with negative self-talk or with calling yourself a failure or whatever. It's actually completely opposite. It's saying, I want to be in control of where I'm headed. Being in control makes me more confident, makes me a lot happier. If I can critically look at my behavior and pull out what's not working for me and learn from my mistakes, then I'm going to be a lot more dynamic. I'm going to be a lot more flexible. I'm going to be less grounded and rooted in certain things. And I'm going to be a lot easier going when things don't work out my way because I can look at it, reframe it, change what needs to be changed and go at it again. If you try and do this, let's use the fitness thing as an example. If you tried to do that and you used every excuse under the sun as to why you gave up halfway, other than saying, I just wasn't consistent enough, maybe I need to change things within my behavior, then the next time you embark on that same goal, you're going to approach it in the exact same way, not taking accountability when things don't go right. And then you'll just continue to blame external things and nothing changes. So the issue with self-serving bias is that we aren't good at learning from our mistakes. We refuse to learn from our mistakes. And because we don't like making mistakes, because we're so avoidant of mistakes, we are probably also less likely to take bigger risks when we go and do something. So we're more likely to, because we want to be like, oh, it was due to my intelligence that this went well. It's due to this, due to that. And so we don't set the bar too high because we don't want to call ourselves out when we do something wrong, okay? So this is key when it comes to goal setting, right? You really, really, really want to be good at learning from your failures. That's the best way to be a good goal setter, is to learn from your mistakes and failures and own it. Because when you own your failure, it's a lot easier to own your wins. The next one is herd mentality. Now, herd mentality applies to a whole lot of things, okay? This one's also known as mob mentality or herd behavior. I think I've done a podcast on mob mentality. I don't know. Maybe not. But it refers to the tendency for someone to conform to the actions or the behaviors or the opinions of a larger group. Now, additionally to that, it's where you're not thinking independently or you're not critically appraising that situation, okay? So you're just being like, oh, these people think that, I'm going to do that, without actually thinking about it. Now, disclaimer, this is not the same as, I'm going to go against the grain because that's the popular belief. And if it's a popular belief, it means that they're all sheep and they all don't even think about it and no, it doesn't. There's nothing at all wrong with going along with the crowd as long as you're like, yeah, I agree. I've thought about it and I agree. And so therefore I'm going to go along with the crowd. Some people think they go to the extreme thinking, I don't want to do what the masses do. And again, that's not thinking for yourself, because if you're thinking, well, automatically if the masses are doing it, then they must be sheep or they must be wrong and I'm going to go the other way. That's, again, not thinking for yourself. So herd mentality, it's got nothing to do with not going with the crowd. It's where you go with the crowd without thinking for yourself, okay? Now, we could talk about it from like a society level, but I'm not going to even get that deep. I'm not going to be talking about, that's things like Bitcoin or things like, the financial market. A lot of that has to do with herd mentality, where people are investing their money or throwing their money at something. But let's bring it down on a more personal scale and think about how potentially herd mentality can affect your decisions for your own future. So if you look at your community, maybe you live in a smaller town, or maybe you're, the people that you surround yourself with, your social group, your social network, your family, if they all have certain beliefs, and these could be beliefs around other groups of people where they're really judgmental. Maybe maybe someone, or not even maybe, often people will grow up being racist because of herd mentality, right? Or homophobic because of herd mentality. They grow up with these beliefs of like, oh my God, that's just wrong, or that's just this, or that's just that. And then sometimes they're faced with this situation where they actually learn for themselves and they actually are able to think for themselves. And they're like, I don't actually agree with what I was brought up believing just because that's what I was absorbing around me, okay? So bring it back a little bit, and we're not talking about, discriminating against groups, but maybe you think, I can't go and pursue this career because it's embarrassing. People are going to laugh at me, and I, deep down feel like I have to agree or I have to do what the people around me do, and the more emotionally attached you are to conforming with the people around you, the harder it is to make decisions for yourself, because you fear being judged. You know that if you go against what these people think, they are obviously going to think that you're doing the wrong thing or you're making a mistake. And the more comfortable you are with that, then the easier it is to make your own decisions. So if you can get to a point where you're like, I am genuinely comfortable with the fact that my family thinks that I'm taking too much of a risk moving here or taking this career or quitting this job and doing this or leaving this partner. I am okay with the fact that they believe something and I believe something else because I've thought about it critically and it's just not right for me. Okay? But if you're constantly thinking, I don't want people to think I'm making the wrong decision or I've done something stupid or I've done whatever, so I'm going to conform to the herd to be accepted, then it's going to really impact your happiness because you make decisions based on what other people think instead of what you think, and you just agree with them, okay? So really, really, really pay attention to how herd mentality affects your life. Also in like social settings, like adopting trends or opinions just because the people around you have that opinion and you're like, oh, I want to fit in, okay? The next one, this is really interesting, number 4, is anchoring bias. So this is where people rely really heavily on the first piece of information that they gather on either a person or a topic or an item that they're purchasing. And So you've got that one first piece of information that you get, and then every other piece of information around that is relative to the first piece of information, okay, to the anchor. Now, I'm going to give you an example. So when you are going into a luxury clothing store or a luxury car dealership, you're likely going to be faced with something really, really expensive at the start, okay? That's the anchor. That is how you gain information about this brand. You're like, this is a fucking expensive brand. This is luxury. Then you see an item that in comparison to that first thing that you saw is, in comparison, it's cheap. If you were to see that item somewhere else, you'd be like, that's a really fucking expensive scarf. But because you saw like a $3,000 jacket and then you saw a $300 scarf, you're like, oh, that's not a bad price for a scarf. Because you're using the anchor, but really that scarf is fucking expensive. It's $300 fucking dollars. But you're here about to fucking pay for the scarf because you just saw a $3,000 jacket and you're like, that's a good deal. I'm getting a good fucking deal because this brand is so expensive and this is pretty cheap, okay? The same goes for cars. This is why a lot of businesses will have a really high ticket item just to get you to think that the middle range is cheap. But they're probably only ever trying to sell you the middle range. And a lot of brands use it. It's just leaning into psychology to get people to buy your product and to spend money. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you are aware as the consumer being like, all right, it's not necessarily cheap. I can compare it to other products with other brands. But that's what they do. Here's this anchor, the expensive product, that's what you see first. Then you go through the other products and every other product looks like a great deal. So then you're way more likely to spend money because you think you're getting a deal. Okay. But the same thing can happen when we talk about, people as well. So you might have a really great date with someone and the experience on that night is this person's charismatic, they're generous, they're funny, they're adventurous. So that's your anchor, the first impression that you had of this person. And then you notice that they do something that's quite shitty or they're being a bit of a bully or they're being rude. You kind of will try and dismiss it, being like, yeah, but, you try and make excuses around it because it's relative to the anchor, but they're such a good person. Or the other way around, you might meet an absolute asshole, right? A fuckwit. And you're like, who the fuck is this clown? And then you see them do something nice to somebody and you're like, oh yeah, they're probably just trying to get something out of that person. Maybe, but maybe you saw them when they were just being an absolute asshole, but they do have a good side to them. And maybe that was just out of their good nature to do something nice to someone, if that makes sense. So we will use the anchor, the first piece of information, as like that is the base of what we're going to base all our other decisions around in comparison to that anchor. All right. So obviously it's going to really influence how you judge things, how you judge people, also how you spend your money. And a lot of us are just not really that aware of how much this anchoring bias affects our decision-making every day, okay? Then we've got confirmation bias. So confirmation bias, which I think I don't know how many times I've spoken about it, but I'll brush over it. But it's basically where you will seek out or interpret or remember information that confirms your pre-existing beliefs, okay, or thoughts about a certain thing. And then on top of that, you're probably more likely to dismiss things that don't align with your pre-existing beliefs, all right? Now, this obviously affects your how you process information to make the correct decision about something. And it really leads to people being either really dramatically leaning to one side or being really skewed in their beliefs. And a great example of this is in politics. And I have a firm belief that I think that social media can be extremely damaging to the political landscape globally, just because social media is the most biased thing in the world. Algorithms are so fucking biased. So an algorithm just keeps pumping out exactly what you want to see. It's not giving you the full picture, not even close to the full picture. It's giving you one very specific slice, okay? So then you feel further and further and further and further and further away from someone that might vote for another party, okay? And that is confirmation bias. You're pulling in all the information that you agree with that actually serves you, and anything that maybe highlights the good in the opposing party or highlights a good trait in the leader of the opposing party, you will either dismiss or ignore or be like, no, but that's not, you just won't take it on board. So then you actually don't become a good critical thinker anymore because you have too much confirmation bias. So another like the key things to look out for is selective attention. So you're more likely to notice things that align with you, and you will blatantly dismiss things that don't. It's almost like you're ignoring it, sometimes without even realizing it. Then there's selective interpretation. So this is where you'll be confronted with something that might be ambiguous, and you will find something within that ambiguity that will still support your beliefs without realizing that if you were to look at that same thing from a slightly different angle, it might support the opposing idea or ideology or party or whatever. And then selective memory, of course, that's where you are more likely to just remember events from your past or from conversations or from whatever that support your belief or your opinion about something without remembering the bigger picture and thinking, well, there's also this thing. And this could also work for relationships. A lot of people have this bias towards them always being the good one in the relationship and the partner always being flawed, without thinking, wait a minute, what about that time that I did this to my partner and this and this and this and this? What about the time that I was really toxic, or the time that I demanded things from my partner, but I'm only focusing on the annoying thing that my partner does to me? So it's really important to be aware of this confirmation bias and just try to pull yourself back and think, wait, how could I look at it from the other side? It's not even about agreeing with someone else and agreeing. It's just, how can I zoom out and look at the bigger picture? Because I will show up as a much better friend if I can pay attention to the bigger picture, to my behavior as well. I can look at the other side, and I'm a much better debater, and I can really critically analyze if something is the right decision for me or not. So for example, every time an election rolls around, I will look at what every party is proposing that they're going to do. I mean, whether they're going to do it or not, that's fucking politics in general. But I'll look at what all the parties are proposing that they're going to do. And I always vote based according to that. I don't have an emotional alliance to a political party. And every time I see myself skewing emotionally to a political party, I ask myself, why? Why do I feel emotionally attached to this? And is it because of the party, or is it because I really believe in what they're doing? Because often you'll be attached to something, and then that party or person will do something that you don't agree with, and you're like, I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know about it, because it feels like a personal stab. Okay? So you've got to get better at critically thinking, and then it's so much easier to not attach yourself, to not get offended, to not get defensive in debates and in conversations. Okay, number 6. Then we've got something called hindsight bias. So this is also referred to as the I knew it all along effect, or I knew it all along bias. And it's the tendency where people believe that after an event has occurred, that they had predicted it, or they were expecting it, or they knew the outcome before the whole thing happened, even if there's like actually no foundation or no proof that, or evidence that they would have been able to predict that thing. So it leads people to think that past events are actually more predictable than they were. So the features are overestimating predictability, distorted memory. So you often will look back and think that your beliefs around that thing were probably a lot stronger than they actually were. Like you look back and be like, I knew this was going to happen. I knew it. Whereas maybe in the past you didn't know that it was going to happen, but you thought maybe, this is not going to work out well. Or maybe this, it's not like this deep knowing that it was going to happen. Or something else called simplification of cause and effect. So once you know what the outcome is, people tend to look at all the leading events up to that thing as being like, oh, well, look at all these events that led up to that thing. It was inevitable. That's why I knew, because I knew about all these events coming up to it when you probably didn't, And you're probably ignoring all these other things that might have also pointed to that thing heading in the opposite direction. So that could be predicting other people's breakups. It could be predicting a sporting event. It could be predicting some event, some catastrophic thing, whatever. So basically, it can lead to overconfidence in decision making, and it can make it really difficult to learn from past mistakes, because you might be thinking that you understood something a lot better than you actually did. Number 7, we've got affect heuristic. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but basically this affect heuristic is relying on emotions rather than information. So it's this mental shortcut that we do when we're trying to make a decision over something, where we will rely on our immediate emotional response to something, our affect, in order to make a decision, or in order to pass judgment on something, rather than pausing, thinking about it, reasoning, maybe looking at it a bit more critically or a bit more logically, and then making a decision. So you pretty much allow your emotions, good or bad emotions, to take over and to influence how risky you think that is, or to influence what you think that person's behavior is going to be like, or how you're going to be feeling in the future, or if it's going to be a good decision or a bad decision, even if that what you're thinking is not at all related to your emotions, okay? It's like that saying, never make a promise when you're happy, never reply when you are angry, and never make a decision when you are sad. And that, I don't know who said it. I was trying to look it up, and a lot of it says like anonymous, but it is such a good saying, and you have to remind yourself of that all the time, because our emotions will cause us to be quite dramatic in our decision making. And it's really important to like pause and think about it before we react. How often have you sent like a really impulsive text message, or you like were so angry at someone, and then in hindsight you look at what you said or you look at what you wrote and you think like, God, that was so extreme. I was really quite mean. And that's because your emotions were speaking. Now, there's a huge difference between following your gut instinct and acting from your initial emotion, okay? Your gut instinct is a different feeling altogether. It's a deep knowing of what you believe to be right or wrong at that time or in that moment. A gut instinct also lasts a whole lot longer. Whereas acting from emotion often stems from fear, whereas gut instinct does not stem from fear. It is not a form of anxiety. A gut instinct could be to do something risky, that you feel that because you know yourself that this is the right decision for you, even if it means throwing away something that's still really good right in front of you. Whereas often acting on your emotions and your anxiety will cause you to pull back and to be fearful. Now, there are ways that this affect heuristic can happen where it's quite annoying. Like you might be someone that when you're really excited, you invite people over. Come over on Saturday, come over on Sunday, la, 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 la. And then you've filled up your calendar on the Saturday and Sunday and you're like, oh my God, it comes to the day and you're like, I'm not in the mood. Why did I do that? Why do I always do that? If you're someone that does that all the time, then this is a great thing to learn about yourself, okay? So in future, what you can do is you say, you know what? I'd love to do something with you this Saturday. How about we pencil something in, but I need to check my calendar. And then I will let you know in 24 hours if we can lock that in. This is if you know for a fact that you're like, I always overextend myself. I'm not saying do this for every invitation, but if you're someone, and I know a few people that are like this and it's hilarious, but if you're someone that always stretches yourself too thin, then use this as a tool. Just say, let's pencil something in, but I need to check my time. I'm not 100%. Then after sitting on it for 24 hours, be like, have I filled up my weekend too much, and is this going to make me tired based on my normal experiences? And if the answer is yeah, it is too tired, then you just reply saying, hey, look, mate, I've overbooked myself this weekend. Why don't we pencil it in for later? So that way you're not making a promise when you're happy, like that saying says. You're able to be like, all right, I know I was overexcited, I was overambitious with my social calendar. It's not going to fucking work for me, okay? It can be good, okay? So this affect heuristic is good when you don't have time to think about something, and sometimes you just have to make a decision on the spot. Relying on your emotions can help you do that. It's not all bad. Your emotions aren't bad, but it's important to think, well, has in the past relying on my emotions in that moment made me be too reactive, too snappy, and then it gave me demons the next day because I wasn't good at reacting? Or has it made me overcommit consistently my entire fucking life? Or have I made decisions because I'm too fearful and then I had FOMO because everyone else went and did that thing and I was like, I could have just gone and done that. Okay, so whenever you have the opportunity to just sit and be like, all right, am I making like a rash decision, or can I sit on it and think about it? Then do it. But it can be good as far as where, you don't have the luxury of time to make a decision. Number 8, belief perseverance. So this is where someone will hold on to their belief even when it's confronted with contradictory evidence or facts. So if you are one of these people, it's really important to just be aware that this is just a bias. Changing your beliefs when you are confronted with evidence that is just like you can't dispute it is really hard to do, because often we will attach our identity, our sense of who we are, to these beliefs. And then to say that I was wrong, we feel like that's going to, a part of us is going to die. But obviously that's not the case, and it's not going to die, but we feel so strongly like that. We also don't want to think that everyone else around us is like, oh, ha, 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 you were wrong, you're an idiot. But there are ways that you can learn new information and say, you know what, I was wrong. I've been presented with this new information and I'm happy to say I've learned something new today. And people are not going to think that you are like flawed for saying that. If anything, I actually really respect someone that can be flexible with their mindset and with their beliefs. I think it's a really great trait to have. But these are the key aspects of it. So the first one is resistance to change. So this is where you're going to reject new information or even reinterpret information that will align with your existing beliefs. Then there's cognitive dissonance. So that's basically where you are ignoring everything and you're still like, you're steadfast holding that belief. And people will often resolve it by basically downplaying any information that comes their way or just ignoring what's being told to them, which can be extremely frustrating for the people around them. And then there's bias in information processing. So it's how you selectively will take on new information and be like, oh, yeah, but it's like this because of this. But that's not really true. No. And you just kind of pick and choose so you can still hold that existing belief. Like a great example of this is that documentary on flat earthers on Netflix. It's classic. And it's people who will still hold on to this belief no matter what. Then we've got different forms of this belief perseverance. So one is self-impression perseverance. And this is where you will cling to beliefs about yourself, even when they are completely inaccurate, even when they're detrimental and not good for you, okay? So you will stick to this belief about yourself and people will be like, well, no, you are able to do this because of this, because of that, because of that. And you're like, no, this is who I am. So then you're not able to change because really change can only occur with a change in your beliefs of what you're capable of doing. Another one is the naive theory perseverance. So it's where you hold on to broader theories about the world, about scientific views, about, politics or whatever, even when new evidence has come forward to challenge that, new science or new whatever has come forward to challenge that. And then there's social impression perseverance, where you will maintain beliefs about other people even if that person has changed, even if you learn new information about that person. Actually, my narcissistic ex used to be like, he would see one thing that he didn't like about someone and that's it. They're done, burnt, done in his mind. And no matter how nice he found out this person was, no matter what they did, he's like, nah, bad vibes on this person. He'd do that to like family members of mine. Anyway, psycho. But yeah, that's what people will do. Okay, so moving on. Number 9, this is a really interesting one. I'm going to hope I can summarize it quite well. Second last one, omission bias. So I've got a lot of notes here so I can figure out what I'm saying because I found it difficult to explain. But it's basically where people tend to view harmful actions, so committing an act, as worse or more morally wrong than harmful inaction. Okay, failing to act versus committing an act. So even when the consequences of the inaction are going to be more harmful, so people are more likely to judge like a bad outcome from doing something as more blameworthy than a bad outcome from not doing something. So there's that lever test thing of like, if you saw a train and it was heading down a train track and it was going to kill 5 people, but you could pull a lever so it could divert its path and then it's only going to kill 1 person, what would you do? So that's that moral dilemma of, do I let nature take its course or engineering take its course or whatever you want to call it and these 5 people die? Or do I intervene, but then I feel responsible for the death of that 1 person? That's that moral dilemma, and it's used in a few TV shows. It's a great question. But another really good real-life example of this is in organ donation. So countries, and I don't know how new this data is, but in the US, for example, I don't know if it's still the way, but being an organ donor is voluntary. You have to opt in to be an organ donor. And because you've got to opt in to being an organ donor, people that are kind of on the fence about it or whatever, they won't do it. They're not sure. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So the rates of organ donors, once people die, are they an organ donor or not, are significantly lower than countries where being an organ donor is the default option and you have to opt out of being an organ donor. And this is in a lot of European countries. So in a European country where you have to opt out of being an organ donor, people think, well, the action of opting out feels more harmful than just not doing it. Like, more harmful than, like if it was default and I didn't have to think about it and I just wasn't going to be an organ donor, I might not take the action of signing up to be an organ donor. But now that I am signed up as an organ donor, I feel like it's more harmful to take myself off. And in countries where organ donation is the default, the rate of organ donors, obviously after death, is up in some countries 100%. Okay? So that is a good explanation of kind of how that psychology works based on how it's framed, inaction versus action, all right? And I'll give you some other examples. So in a medical context, someone might not want to do a surgery. Like say someone's life is on the line and they're going to die. They might not want to do the surgery because they're like, if I intervene and it causes death, but there's a big chance that it could keep them alive, I still don't want to do it because I don't want the risk of being involved in their death, even if not performing that surgery means they're going to die anyway. So it's kind of like, I feel like inaction is less harmful than the action here, if that makes sense. And the same thing goes for like, in sports where you have to make a call or, where you have to make a decision around firing someone or not firing someone or things like that, all right? Last one is the framing effect. So this is a bias, a cognitive bias, where people make decisions based on how the information is presented or how the information is framed rather than the context of the information, okay? So you look at advertisement. So if an advertisement leads with, we have 70% success rate in this thing, you're more likely to be like, oh, I might use that service than if someone was advertising, we have a 30% failure rate. You're going to be like, 30%, that's pretty big. I'm probably not going to go there. Why are they advertising that they fail? 30%, that's not good. Or like, let's say if it's a fertility clinic, if they say like over 50% of our clients do not fall pregnant, you'd be like, that's a huge number. I'm absolutely not going to that clinic. But if they said nearly 50% find success and fall pregnant, you're like, that's quite a big number. Okay, it's the whole glass is half empty, half full, that kind of vibe. But I think it's important to look at it from like risk, what you're willing to risk and what you're not willing to risk. So when you're making a decision that involves risk, you're going to be generally risk averse when something is framed as like, oh, you're going to gain from this. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm more likely to do that thing. So it's really important to just be quite critical when you're making a decision based on the data that's being presented to you. Like, is this actually a good idea? Is this actually good bang for buck? Like, am I getting good return on my investment? That kind of thing. And then of course, things are going to be framed in a way that either make you way too optimistic about that thing, or even look at like certain like products. If something's labeled as like 80% or 80 or 90% fat free versus 10% fat. I mean, I'm all for fat. Very good for the brain. But I'm just using it as like, that's like the marketing ploy. Or when they talk about cleaning products kills 99% of germs, they're not going to say 1% of germs will still be living on your fucking kitchen counter. 1%. That's like a billion germs still. You'll be like, that's fucked. I'm going to find another product, So it's all in how things are marketed and how we perceive this kind of framing effect. So the framing effect, I think, is more around like marketing and stuff, but I think it's still really, really interesting just to be aware of it. So yes, that is my 10 mental or psychological biases to look out for to help you make better decisions. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I loved it because I love paying attention to how our psychology works and how it frames us, to make decisions out of confidence or out of fear, and how that's actually impacting our long-term decisions for like things that are going to impact our future and our happiness and our self-esteem and our confidence and our relationships, blah, 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 and all the above. So yeah, love you guys so much. I love you so much. Shout out to my global beans. Shout out to my beans in South Africa. Love you guys all so much. That is all. If you want to send in any listener questions or write in or suggest any episode topics, just email at info@dyfmpod.com. That's all. Love you guys so much. And always remember, be kind to yourself, be kind to your brain. Don't take shit from anyone, and especially don't take shit from yourself. Danke.